With the election just 1 week away, Donald Trump is looking really good in early vote numbers, and in this video, I will be giving you my updated 2024 presidential election prediction. So let's get into it. First, we're going to start off with the safe states. Safe state characterizations are states that are going to go for either party by 12 or more percentage points. We're going to start off with Kamala Harris's. Her safe states are Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Colorado, New Mexico, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine's 1st Congressional District, Illinois, and New York, putting her safe electoral votes at 196. Now we're going to go to Donald Trump's safe electoral votes. We have Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska at large, along with Nebraska's 1st and 3rd congressional districts, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia, putting Donald Trump's safe electoral votes at 131. Now we're going to go to the likely states for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Likely characterizations are states that are going to go for either party by 6 to 12 points. We're going to start off with Kamala Harris. Her first likely state is Maine at large. Maine at large voted for Biden by 9 points in 2020. And if we look at the mail-in voting, we see that Democrats are up about 18% over Republicans. Early vote does tend to heavily favor Democrats, but I do believe that Kamala Harris will win the state by a likely margin. The next state that we're going to have as a likely margin for Kamala Harris is the state of New Hampshire. Now, if we look at the early voting in New Hampshire, we see that Republicans are actually doing better than they did in 2020. They're only behind 6 points. And so if we look at the 2022 data, we see that Democrats actually led Republicans by 14 points. So this is definitely a good sign for Republicans, but I just do believe that because New Hampshire is a very Democrat state, I still see it going to the Harris column by a likely margin. And so that finishes off our likely margins. Now we're going to go to our likely margins for Donald Trump. First state we have is Texas. Now if we look at the early voting in 2022, we see that the GOP just narrowly outnumbered Democrats by just 2 points in 2022. Texas Republicans overall had a pretty good year in Texas. But if we look right now, we see the Republicans are up 15 points against Democrats. That's a 15-point improvement from 2022. Now, of course, this is a presidential year and there's going to be higher turnout in Texas, and that is expected. But as of right now, it is looking really good for Republicans in the state. The next one we're going to look at is Ohio. Ohio is going to be a likely margin for Donald Trump. If we look at the early and mail-in votes in Ohio, we see that Democrats were up 5 in 2022. But now Republicans actually lead Democrats by about 7 points. Ohio has been a very rightward trending state, and I do believe that this is going to go to Republicans by a likely margin. And then the last state that we have is Florida. Now, Florida was really a red wave year in 2022. Florida Republicans did phenomenal in Florida. And we see that in the early voting, Republicans led by 6 points. Now, this time around, Republicans are up 11 points in the early voting. I don't believe that Donald Trump is going to win by, say, as much as Ron DeSantis did in Florida because it is a higher turnout election. But for right now, I do see this as a likely margin. And so we have one more likely characterization. We have Maine's 2nd district. Now this isn't a state, so it's kind of hard to look at the mail-in ballot in Maine because we don't know where that's actually coming from in Maine. But Maine's 2nd district voted for Trump by 6 points, and I do believe it's going to vote for him again by a likely margin. Now we're going to go to the lean states for each party. Lean states are states that are going to go to either Democrats or Republicans by 3 to 6 points. We're going to start off with Kamala Harris. I do believe that Virginia is going to be a lean margin for Democrats. Now, if we look at the early voting in Virginia, we see that Democrats are up about 12 points. And if we look at the 2022 early voting data out of Virginia, they were up about like 26 points. So Republicans are really making up the game in Virginia. Now, that's not to say that they're going to do 12 points better in Virginia. Of course, more Republicans are going to be voting early, and so that doesn't mean it's going to be a blowout. So these are early numbers, and I would say not to make definite conclusions off of them just because we don't know who's going to be voting on election day. But I do believe that Democrats are going to win the state by a lean margin. The next state that we're going to look at is Minnesota. I also believe that Minnesota is going to be a lean state for Democrats. And if we look at the mail-in voting right now in Minnesota, we see that Democrats are up 23 points over Republicans. Now, if we look back in 2022, we see that Democrats were up about 17 points, so they are outdoing their 2022 numbers. But I do believe that Minnesota is not going to go for Harris by 7 points like it did for Biden in 2020, just because of this rightward environment right now. And so I could see this going to Harris maybe by 5 or 6 points, but anyway, that would be a lean margin. And then the last lean characterization that we have is Nebraska's 2nd district. That is going to be a lean margin for Kamala Harris. Now, Joe Biden won Nebraska's 2nd district by 6 points in 2020. And if we look at the early voting out of Nebraska as a whole, we see that Republicans are only slightly outdoing Democrats in this state. Of course, the election day vote is overwhelmingly Republican, but as of right now, I still see this going to Kamala Harris by a lean margin. So that finishes off our lean characterizations. Now we're going to go to our tilt characterizations. And these are basically the 7 swing states that are going to be the closest in this election. We're going to start off with Donald Trump. I do believe that Donald Trump is going to win North Carolina by a tilt margin. The Donald Trump campaign probably has gotten nervous about North Carolina ever since Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina. But if we look at the early vote right now, we see that Republicans are still up 1 point in the early and mail-in votes. And if you look back at 2022, which wasn't a bad year for Republicans in North Carolina, we see the Democrats led the early vote by 7 points. And so I do believe that Republicans are still going to win this state. Donald Trump has campaigned there a lot, and North Carolina is just, it is a Republican state. I do think it's going to go to Trump by 2 points, and that would be a tilt margin. The next state that I have as a tilt Republican state is the state of Georgia. Now, the early vote, there's been a big surge in early vote, and it looks like the early and mail-in vote might actually outpace the 2020 numbers. If we look at the numbers right now, we see that Republicans are up 4 points in Georgia early voting. If we look back at 2022, this was a rather good year for Republicans, but Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate in Georgia, who was endorsed by Donald Trump, still ended up to lose by 3 points. The early and in-person ballots, Democrats were up 8 points. And that is a lot. But you see, the Republicans have turned that around, and now they're up 4 points. But if you do compare this to 2020, Republicans are actually doing 4 points worse in the early and mail-in vote in Georgia. I do still believe that Donald Trump will win this state, as I do see him winning the election day vote. And it's really just a bad sign to see Democrats losing the early in-person and mail-in votes in these critical swing states. That was supposed to be their firewall against Republicans, but it definitely looks like it is crumbling, and that's going to be a tilt margin for Donald Trump. The next state that we have as a tilt margin is the state of Arizona. Now, this is one of the states that Republicans are just crushing Democrats. They're up 8 points in early voting. If you look at 2022, we see that Republicans were only up by 1 point. Of course, these are early numbers, so not all of the ballots have come in. I do believe that this will tighten as more mail-in ballots come in, as more people vote, but the fact that Republicans are still up and 1.2 million ballots have been cast, that's definitely going to be a good sign for Republicans, and that's going to be a tilt margin. The next state that we're going to look at is the state of Nevada, another state where Republicans are doing exceptionally well in the early in-person and vote by mail. We see Republicans are up 5 points in the early in-person and mail-in votes. And you look back at 2022, this was a year that wasn't too bad for Democrats and wasn't too good for them either. We see that in this year, Nevada elected a Republican governor but a Democrat Senate candidate. It was really close in this year. But we see that Democrats were up 2 points in the early voting. And now we see that Republicans are up 5 points in the early voting. And so this is definitely not looking good for Democrats so far. I do believe Trump is going to win this by a tilt margin. Alright, now we have the three Rust Belt states, the states that will decide this election. So now I'm going to go to, we're going to start off with Wisconsin and Michigan, and then I'm going to end it off with Pennsylvania. So right now, I see Kamala Harris winning Michigan by a tilt margin. And even though Arabs have been turning to Republicans, I still do believe that Kamala Harris is going to win the state because of white suburban women turning to Democrats, and just because of how well Democrats did in 2022. We see that in the early vote, Democrats are up 14 points in Michigan. If we compare that to 2022, Democrats were up 20 points. But what is noted about in 2022 is that Democrats as a whole did really well. They beat the Republican challengers by 10 points and 12 points. And so while Republicans are eating up the margins that Democrats had, I don't think it's going to be enough right now in Michigan. I think the Democrats are going to narrowly win this as of right now. This is one of the states that I could really see going either way. But as of right now, I have Michigan as a tilt margin for Democrats. And then I have Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as tilt states for Donald Trump. Now, both of these states are really close states. And in Pennsylvania, we see that Democrats right now have a 30-point edge in the early in-person and mail-in vote. But you look back at 2022, we see the Democrats had a 48% margin over the Republicans. And Republicans didn't do that well in Pennsylvania. And that would be an 18-point improvement from 2022, that year that was underwhelming for the Republicans. And so I do believe, because of these strong early vote numbers we see in Pennsylvania, I do believe that Donald Trump will win this by a tilt margin. And then the state of Wisconsin, I have this one as a tilt Republican state. Now, actually, the Republican incumbent senator in Wisconsin won in 2022, a year that Wisconsin elected mostly Democrats. We see that back in 2022, the early vote was about 3 points for Democrats. Right now, the early vote, we see that Democrats are actually up 12 points against Republicans. I do want to warn you guys about this state. This is really early on, and only about 850,000 have been cast, and that's including in-person votes. We see that almost half of this is in-person votes. So when you look at the mail-in ballots, only half of the mail-in ballots basically have been counted in this number, or actually a little less than that. So I'm not going to make opinion about the Wisconsin early vote number, but the reason why I have this as a tilt margin for Donald Trump is because Biden narrowly won this in 2020, and he only won it by 20,000 votes. And so I believe that Wisconsin is going to be a tilt margin, just because I see Donald Trump really running up the margins in the rural areas, and I think that's going to help him win in Wisconsin. So this is my updated prediction. Donald Trump would get 297 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 241. I hope you guys guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to smash the like button down below and subscribe. Comment your thoughts or suggestions in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.